We don't have the same sort of border problems that Arizona does, but Maine is a border state, so we do have some of them. And there is the potential for that sort of fraud, abuse, and violence coming here. So, yes, I definitely support the same sort of thing being passed in Maine.
2/3 of Americans say that they support a similar law to Arizona. They may not support the Arizona law, but they support something similar to it in terms of immigration reform. And I think that's an important distinction. I don't think a lot of people really know what the Arizona law does or what it actually says, how many people actually read the laws, heck, how many even politicians actually read their own bills or even read the laws for that matter. But 2/3 of Americans do support some sort of immigration reform that ties into Arizona. So obviously it's an important topic for many Americans out there.
If you're going to be coming into the country illegally, you're already saying that you're not going to recognize the Constitution. You're not going to recognize the force of law within the country because you're breaking the law in order to come here. So you're already setting the precedent of breaking the law. Now you bring in illegal immigrants, they're obviously going to try and work unless they are of the more violent intentions. But let's assume for the time being that they're only coming here in order to find work. They obviously cannot legally get a job because they have no documentation, they're not citizens, they're not here legally. So they're going to start the process of breaking the law further with identity fraud, identity theft. So they start going down a path where they're breaking more and more laws in order to maintain their existence. They're beginning to learn more and more to snub their nose at the rule of law. They're not assimilating into society. They're adhering to the, most likely, the corrupt methods of governance from the places where they come from, which they are supposedly trying to escape.
Now, illegal immigrants, they broke their law. They broke some laws to come here. But it's like, I use this analogy. Illegal immigrants are going to Disney World, let's say, and Disney World being the United States. And they got a fast pass, and they cut in front of the line, and they got to ride Thunder Mountain, aka obtain citizenship, or whatever form you want to talk about, a green card, whatever it may be. Now, what happens to all those legal immigrants that waited in line hours and hours and hours, aka years and years and years, to ride Thunder Mountain or obtain citizenship? What happens to all those people? So I think that is a very important analogy in talking about the difference between legal and illegal immigration. This is why it's so upsetting to a lot of people that illegal immigrants can just come in here and then we're going to either grant them citizenship or at least get them on the path to that when all these other people have been waiting in line. Is it fair? I don't think it would be fair. I mean, if I was a legal immigrant, I'd be really upset if somebody broke the laws and they're getting a better benefit than me.
And now, do you favor allowing legal residents to vote in Maine?
I come back to the issue from an election reform background. I have worked very hard to expand voting opportunities for folks around the country, and I certainly have been working hard on ranked voting, which would allow third parties to have a voice without spoiling the vote. When you look at the immigration issue, for me, I have set a policy or a methodology for myself in terms of how I approach issues. And in this particular case, I work to expand voting access to folks who, as far as the Constitution will allow.
Allowing non-citizens the right to vote just opens the door for massive fraud, voter fraud.
Simply because someone is working here doesn't mean that they have the right to vote. If I flip burgers, does that mean I get to choose, along with others that flip burgers but are not legal citizens, the right to choose who the next president is or next legislator in the House? I don't believe that's necessary. To pay taxes doesn't mean that it's a free check for all the rights that legal citizens have. If that was the case, there would be no purpose in trying to become a legal citizen. Just keep your residency status up. No, I don't believe that. But you pay taxes, well, that's because you're also enjoying the benefits that all the citizens and other residents get to enjoy.
Many years ago, non-citizens did have the right to vote. However, they found that the immigrants were being used by politicians, pandering to them as a voting bloc for power, that they were not integrating into the society. They were not learning the rules, the regulations, the institutions. They weren't being educated. They weren't learning the language. So that those laws which allowed non-citizens to vote were repealed, and the programs were instituted whereby people were given a chance to assimilate into society. They were expected to learn the language, be here for so many years, learn some of the history, so that they could learn what was expected of them in a modern, industrial, civilized society. So that is one group of citizens who believe that this is a process which must be preserved if we're going to preserve the benefits of a civilized society.
When this came before our committee in the legislature, a number of people waved the Constitution at us, saying that it was unconstitutional, when in fact it's not. U.S. citizens, contrary to popular belief, do not have the right to vote. They have the right to not be discriminated against. Ergo, we have felon voting here in Maine, but in other places they can be limited. If it were an explicit right in the U.S. Constitution, that right could therefore not be taken away, and in many states it is for a multitude of issues, or a multitude of reasons. So I have come to this issue trying to expand voter rights within the framework of what the Constitution allows, and until the Constitution says that U.S. citizens are the only ones that are exclusively allowed to vote, it makes it very difficult for me to say that legal residents shouldn't vote as well.
We can't be afraid to offend Hispanic voters. I think that's another notion here. Though I will say there has been polling that suggests a lot of Hispanic Americans, a lot of Latino voters really support. They support immigration reform, but they more importantly they support enforcing that. They're just like people, just like you or me. I mean, it's not about race, okay? And I think that's really important. In terms of who believes what, it's not about race. Anybody would want anybody to treat humans like humans, okay? And I think that's really important. Hispanics, blacks, whites, no matter your race or ethnicity, 2/3 of Americans believe in a strong immigration reform and enforcing the current immigration policies. And so right there, it's not about race. So those people out there that are saying, it must be racist if they don't agree with immigration reform. Well, how would you answer people that are Hispanic and that say that they support enforcing the current immigration policy? They support Arizona's law. Or they support strengthening the border. Are they racist when they have that cultural background? So it can't be about race in that situation. So it's not about race in general. So I think it's really important to make that clear.
Well, Diane, what's the difference between an immigrant and a citizen?
Well, the difference between an immigrant and a citizen is, in one instance, it means that you've migrated to this country. Does not necessarily mean you've become a U.S. citizen or a citizen of this country. You could be here illegally. You could be here legally on a visa or on a permanent residency card and still be considered an immigrant. You could also become a U.S. citizen after going through the immigration process and be both an immigrant and a U.S. citizen. A U.S. citizen, however, you actually are either born here on either U.S. soil or U.S., either that's here in the country or on a military base. You had parents that were here and were U.S. citizens. Or you could also become a naturalized citizen and go through the formal immigration process, which millions of people go through every year. But really what we're talking about is whether or not you are here permanently as an immigrant, or if you're here for a shorter period of time. But in either instance, you can be considered an immigrant. And the irony is that you can be a U.S. citizen and still be an immigrant.
The problem with defining a legal resident versus legally in the country is that there is no way to determine whether or not somebody who is a resident in the state, which you can prove by a utilities bill perhaps, there's no way to determine whether or not that person is in the country legally or illegally. So in essence, claiming that you're only going to give the vote to a legal resident there's no way to stop an illegal alien in the country illegally from obtaining that right to vote, because there is no mechanism to determine whether or not they're here legally. The government agencies who are tasked with identifying legal or illegal immigrants has refused to cooperate with those seeking to make that determination, when the government itself has no interest in determining whether or not somebody is here legally or illegally. For determining resident status, there is no way to keep illegals from getting the right to vote. Therefore, you do not give the right to vote to anybody that is not a citizen. If people want to become a citizen, they go through the process, they do the education, and they wait their turn. Once they have learned our ways, the system, gain an appreciation for the history of the country and the way the election system works, then I'm all for granting them citizenship. But until that time, they can wait to have the right to vote that is granted to U.S. citizens.